If you feel like you can't get anything done because everything feels simultaneously urgent and pointless, or if no matter what you do, then there's always going to be somewhere between like 10 and a million steps that still have to get done, then you're not just being lazy. You're more likely burnt out, or at least really close to it. And believe me, you're not alone. This podcast has been off of the air for about 6 months now. And so today, I'm going to talk to you about how I'm getting back on track and how you can do it too. By the end of this episode, you are going to learn some of the most common signs of burnout and how to deal with them, and a four-step process for getting back on track to getting the things done that need to be finished and rebuilding those sustainable pathways of work and behavior that allow you to continue your work, continue being productive and effective as a student, as a worker, as a writer, researcher, whatever it is you are doing, and not fall back into such periods of burnout. So by the end of this episode, you're going to have a much gentler approach to dealing with this issue that plagues many of us. So let's get started. Hi, I'm Alex Mika, and I'm a PhD student studying English literature. As both a student and a teacher, I'm really interested in finding the best time management strategies for personal, professional, and educational success. For those of you who know me, you might know that one of my biggest fatal flaws, my Achilles heel, is that I almost always bite off just a little bit more than I can chew. And I know this. I know this about myself. And for many, many years, especially during the summer, because I would think, I have so much time living on the academic schedule, having the summers, free of classes and things like that, that I'm going to do all these things. I set up a really ambitious plan where I'm going to do this project and that project and that. And so what happens by the end of the summer, really by the middle of it, is I get maybe 50% of the first project done, maybe 20% of the second one, and projects 3 through 7 fall to the wayside. And by the time the end of the summer comes along, it's the next semester, I'm totally forlorn. I'm depressed. It's so miserable because I feel like I failed on all those counts. Even if, that 50%, the 20% were impressive, because I set up those expectations, uh, it really can be, upsetting and demoralizing. And so one of my goals with this podcast, and really throughout the last few years, is I've been trying to get better about setting better expectations. That's the first thing. But also developing more sustainable strategies for consistent growth. Just a little bit better each time, each day, getting a little bit done. And so, and that's one of the major subjects of this podcast. But one of the biggest things that I noticed about my old workflow was that it was very much in booms and busts. I would have, let's say, a month of just incredible progress on a project. I would be, you know, working at it all the time, and I'd be making huge progress on that project. And then I end up the next month watching like 30 westerns in a month. And the thing is, I don't even really like westerns. That's how you know it's a problem. But I found myself in that kind of situation. And so the first thing to realize about burnout is that you have, in fact, burned out. There are a lot of different symptoms, and they range from physiological, such as, tension headaches, muscle pains, loss of appetite, to other ones, such as like emotional exhaustion, where you wake up like just exhausted. You wake up tired, and you go to bed wired. You're still thinking. You're constantly processing. You're thinking about, okay, this is what I have to get done tomorrow, and you have difficulty falling asleep. You might be procrastinating. You might be avoiding certain issues, or different types of things that are kind of urgent. They have to get done, but you just can't bring yourself to do them. And finally, one of the biggest ones is the um, perfection paralysis, thinking, well, I have to get it perfect. I have to get it perfect. And that's stopping you from finishing the thing because um, it's next to impossible to get something at that level, especially when you're tired. And a really big one is also the fear of stopping. You feel like if you just stop for one day, then everything around you is going to crumble. And the reality of it is, in a lot of cases, it's not. Not everything is going to crumble. Of course, there are certain things that are urgent. There are things that have to get done that day to day. But really, a lot of things are about incremental growth, especially when you're learning, especially when you're a student. And so, one thing for me, the latest sort of victim of this process was this podcast. I planned 10 episodes in advance when I began this project. I wrote out the outlines, I generated all the scripts, I thought about all the stories that I want to tell, and I created a promotional plan and a schedule for releasing the episodes. But then one thing happened, which was kind of outside of my control, is that I had a lot of tech issues with the things that I was working with. And so it was taking a lot more time than it really should have because I was experiencing these technical problems. Then, life got in the way. I had a lot of work. I'm working on a dissertation right now. I'm teaching. I was traveling a lot in the summer with different conferences and research workshops and things like that, and visiting family. And so everything kind of piled up until, it got to be too much. But the first thing, I think, is the recognition of you're burned out. And that is the first step, recognition. You have to, first of all, identify those symptoms that we talked about, and you have to tell yourself, man, I'm fried, right? Just telling yourself is a really important step. And it sounds silly, it sounds maybe a little hokey, but being true with yourself about what is actually going on with you is a huge step, because a lot of times you can get down on yourself thinking, I'm just being lazy, you know, I'm just avoiding, or I'm just procrastinating. Well, those may be true, but it also might be signs of a much deeper issue. And so just admitting to yourself that you are fried, that you're burnt out, is a really important first step, because then you're less likely to misattribute these kinds of symptoms to other lesser factors. And the second thing is, once you've identified that you truly are burnt out, is to track your energy levels and your levels of alertness. Thinking about, all right, when I get up, am I tired? When am I most alert during the day? When, if I had to do work, would be the best point? So for me, that used to be the evening, late evening, but I've moved away from that. And so I found that I actually am most alert in the early mornings. So I get up a little bit earlier and I get done first the very immediate things, sending the emails, grading papers, lesson planning, those things that are with immediate deadlines that I really have to get done today. And then once that's warmed me up, because those things don't necessarily take a lot of mental energy for me, I treat them as a warm up. And then I do the more long term and further distance looking projects, such as working on a chapter of the dissertation. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. The first thing is to identify when you are most alert and when you are most tired. Just track your kind of energy levels throughout the day for a couple of days and take note of that, because that's going to be really helpful for you for some of the next steps. And then once you have done that, this is the time when it could be a really good idea to tell someone you trust that you're burnt out, that you're tired. And just as it is important to tell yourself this, I found it incredibly helpful to talk with others about that experience. One, because they might be able to, help me. They might have gone through this themselves and they might have practical steps for how to go through it. Two, it just feels good to get it off your chest. And three, just as I've talked about before on this podcast with the idea of accountability buddies, this is a really great opportunity for you to come to terms with this. It also becomes a little more real when you tell someone else, but it also is an opportunity for you to say, you know what, I've recognized this about myself. I'm burnt out, but you know, now I'm ready to start taking steps to get back on track. So that is the first step, recognition. The second one is rest. And we're going to talk about some emergency scenarios in which, let's say, you don't have the luxury of taking a day off or taking a couple days off just to breathe. But in the meantime, if you find that you're in a place where you still can take that opportunity, do it. It sounds completely counterintuitive, but I've always found that when I myself am in these kinds of situations and I'm feeling just totally exhausted, I'll give myself a day to reset. This is a day in which I really minimize the amount of like mental stimulation and information that goes through my brain. And so whether that is auditory, visual, any kind. So I really limit my cell phone use. I really limit um, how much like content I'm engaging with, whether it's watching shows or movies or listening to music, things like that. Even such little things can keep our brains going, right? It sometimes might feel like you're resting when you scroll through TikTok or scroll through Instagram or you read the news, but well, no, reading the news is never restful. But you know what I mean, right? Anytime you're engaging with these things that take your mind off of the more pressing matters, it might feel like rest, but it's just a different kind of mental stimulation. Your brain is still going. It's still processing all of these things, even if it might not feel like it. And so if you can minimize that kind of stuff, it can be really helpful. So if you can, take a bare minimum day, a day that is just focused on getting some good food, resting, and low energy and low like mental stimulation tasks can be incredibly helpful. Now, this is not to say that you have to just sit for the whole day and meditate. For a lot of us, that can be one either incredibly boring or incredibly stressful. Silence can sometimes be very loud, right? And so if you are in that kind of position where you can't like just deal with a totally like silent walk um, or just kind of detached from everything, then I would highly recommend taking like different kinds of tasks that are very repetitive and physical, such as doing laundry, washing the dishes, working out, coloring, any of these kinds of tasks, doodling, journaling, whatever it might be. These things, they are, of course, like especially like the journaling and the doodling, that might be a little bit more kind of mental effort, but things like coloring and drawing and painting or any kinds of things that you're doing with your hands that are repetitive tasks, they can be incredibly soothing. Listen to music, maybe soft, lo-fi, instrumental music, things that are not going to be like overly stimulating. This gives your brain a chance to decompress, and that's really what the goal of this bare minimum day is. And so all of these things will allow you to just kind of put the things aside just for a moment, which right now with burnout, you feel like, I have to do it, I have to do it, I have to do these things, right? All these things are piling up. And and so I understand if this might feel counterintuitive, but also the reason that you're not doing those things is a lot of times you don't have the mental capacity at that moment. It's more productive to step aside for one day than to spend a week just floundering and trying to get all these things done, but not being able to give it that deep focus that they require. So sometimes investing that one day can really save you a lot of time down the line. So, once you have recognized that you are actually experiencing burnout and you've given yourself some time to rest, the next thing to do is to reset. The first thing I like to do, and I highly recommend, is doing an audit. I take out one of my notebooks and I write down everything that needs to get done. This may seem very scary. If it is, I have an alternative. But I really highly recommend doing this. Just taking an inventory of everything that has to get done. I like to visualize these kinds of things. And so then, once I've written everything down, I actually go through it and I say, okay, well, does this really need to get done now? If not, I table it. I put it in a separate column later. I cross it out and I write a separate list. And then I focus on the things that absolutely must get done for the nearest future. If that is too scary, and I recognize that it may be, because sometimes seeing all of that can put you in a spiral. It can be really just too much information to process, and it might feel like, just what am I supposed to do here, right? And so a really great alternative that somebody told me about once is to imagine, like close your eyes and imagine a room that is cluttered, that is messy. You're on an episode of American Pickers or Hoarders or something like that, right? And you walk in this house and you see before you this room that is filled with those tasks. What is the first thing you notice? What is the first like thing that has to get done? Right? Because really, the goal of the audit is not to overwhelm you. It's not to say, oh my goodness, like you have a list longer than Santa's and you're just totally screwed. It's really just to find a place to start. That's what it's for. And so, any kind of way that you can visualize what is the most immediate thing? What are my absolute needs right now? Then, once you've completed that audit and you've identified the most salient things, the ones that are really speaking to you, then you plan not for all of them. You just plan for 3 days, 3 to 7 days. And you think about, okay, what can I reasonably accomplish in these 7 days? And we're not going back to your original schedule here, right? Just like with the rest day, we are focusing on the basics. We are focusing on the bare minimum. And that's why I like to do it closer to the 3 days than the 7, because, a week, that might be a kind of make or break thing. But 3 days, that is a really good way to be generous with yourself. So you think about, okay, you've identified the points where you are most alert and the points where you are most exhausted. So you're going to avoid, obviously, those exhaustion periods. You're going to take those high priority, high effectiveness alert periods, and you're going to think about what can I accomplish in that time. And during these 3 to 7 days, I really try to balance what I call my spinach, the things that I really don't want to do but have to get done, and the candy, my little treats. So for every 2 pieces of spinach that I do, I give myself 1 piece of candy. So let's say I need to grade student papers. The first thing that I'm going to tell myself is I don't need to grade all the papers. I need to grade one, and then I need to grade another one, and then another one. And that way, I'm breaking things down into really small chunks. That's a really huge thing too, is really emphasizing not the finished products, but each step along the way. And so from that audit, I actually do a second one. I waste a lot of paper in this house, but it helps me to think about, okay, for each thing that I absolutely need to do, let me break it down. And so then in that 3-day plan, I'm looking at specific little chunks of that. I'll say, okay, for every 2 student papers that I grade, I'm going to do a lap around my apartment. Or for every 2 student papers I grade, I'm going to have 5 minutes at the piano, and I'm just going to play a song or two that I really enjoy to play. That is a great little treat. It resets my brain, and I'm ready to do 2 more. So thinking about these little chunks and little treats along the way, it's a promise to your brain saying, look, I know that you are tired right now, but if you do this, you have a little reward. When I was taking exams in my program, I had a strategy where before the exam day, I would buy a few Boston cream donuts. I absolutely love them. They're my favorite. And so I would set them on the counter over there behind the camera here, and I would be staring at them just lustfully, and I would be writing my exam, and for every section that I would finish, or for every like major part that I would complete, I would have like half of the donut or a quarter of the donut, whatever, right? However much motivation and sugar I needed for the next section to get me through. But that's the big thing, balancing the spinach with the candy. So I do 2 for 1. That's my typical approach, but figure out what works for you. And the second thing is, like I mentioned, it's all about small incremental gains. You're not trying to finish the whole dissertation here. You're not trying to create the entire outline for your final exam. You're not trying to read through the whole textbook. You're really just going page by page, chapter by chapter. And that is the biggest thing. Break it down. It really helps so much to think about these things in smaller pieces. So when I'm writing my dissertation chapters, which tend to be approximately 10,000 words, that's scary. That's big. So what I tell myself is, well, I don't have to write a 10,000 word dissertation or 10,000 word dissertation chapter. I have to write the intro. I have to write the first paragraph of the intro. And that is one way in which I trick my brain into thinking about, all right, I can write an intro like that. I've done that before. I can write one body section, not in a day, but I can write the first paragraph of it. I can do a close reading of this one passage. These are things that I can do. And so breaking it down into the small chunks and working towards them is a huge thing. And then within those 3 to 7 days of that kind of getting back on track period, I plan out for really, like, again, bare minimum things. So I'm only going to do, let's say, 3 hours of like deep focused work. And within them, I'm going to break those 3 hours down into the Pomodoro chunks, 25 minutes of work, 5 days rest. One of my little tricks that I do is I like to get a small glass of water when I'm working in these like really focused periods, because then I run out of water. It gives me an excuse to stand up and get more. So um, I, I'm not going to dehydrate myself while I'm going through this. I'm like, I need water. So I'm going to get up, I get a little walk, I have some water, I come back, and I've had a little break, and I'm ready to keep going. I'm like, okay, where was I? You don't want to turn it into something that's going to totally distract you, right, and derail your momentum. So that's something to keep an eye out for. But by doing these little things, these little routines, these little rhythms of work, rest, you're getting your brain back into the habit of going through these tasks. And be generous with yourself during these 3 days, especially with those treats. And then I can start weaning myself off of them a little bit, like going back to my typical kind of routine. But for now, it's just about getting back on track, not, being back to your full schedule. And another really helpful thing during this period is I won't work where I usually work. So here at this desk is my normal place. But if I find that I'm in a period of burnout, I might associate this spot with that kind of feeling of dread or procrastination. And so I really like to go to places like the local library or a cafe that tends to be a little bit quieter and people are working. Or I might go to the school library, or I might go to the office, anywhere that I don't normally do work. Because just changing the location can shift you away from that feeling that you associate with the place. If you find yourself in a position where you can't change locations, then try to change some aspect about the location in which you work. Maybe rearrange your desk in a new way and configuration. Maybe if you can, listen to some music to help you work. If you prefer to work in total silence, maybe light a candle, right? Anything that can just make it feel like you're in a new space can be really helpful for detaching yourself from the associations you've created with the place in which you're working. And this brings me to the last point about things to do during this reset period. Ask for help. This might be one of the most difficult things that I'm going to suggest on this episode, but I know for myself, it's really hard to ask for help when you need it. because you might not want to be a burden. You might not want to admit what you think is failure, or you think it's going to reflect poorly on your image in the eyes of others, like a professor or a research administrator. But at the end of the day, a lot of people have gone through this process. People know what it's like. And so even if you don't get all of the things that you need, such as an extension, people are going to be a lot more generous, hopefully, and understanding in a lot of cases. And just from that, they might be able to offer you some help. If you don't vocalize what your concerns are or what you're going through, people can't help you if they don't know what you're going through. And so I remember, this wasn't necessarily in a stage of burnout, but I remember my sophomore year of college, I had a concussion and I was out of class for over a week. It may have been two. And when I got back, I did something that I always hated asking for, and I never did up until that point, as far as I can remember. I asked for an extension for some papers. And some of the professors were, actually all of my professors were completely happy to offer it. Obviously, the case was, you know, a medical one, that I could point to, and which may be, unfair because burnout, I would argue, is also to some extent medical as well, right? You're exhausted. Exhaustion is a serious thing, but nonetheless, they all granted me extensions on the different projects that I had around the time. And I found I didn't actually even take them up on it because it would have meant that instead of doing the work for, it would have just delayed me having to do all of these things within a more crunched period of time because of the recovery period. So even knowing that I had the option of the extension helped me so much. It just alleviated a lot of the stress. I realized, okay, if I need it, it's there and I can do it. And that was so helpful to me. One of the professors was incredibly kind. She pulled me aside, when I told her, and she said, listen, if there's any ways in which I can help, if you want help talking through some of these questions that we've been going through, if you want to meet during my office hours to kind of catch up and talk about what you've been thinking about the readings in this class and work through some of the questions you might have, I'm happy to do that. So you never know what kind of help people are going to offer you. And so I really, really, really highly recommend taking this point in it, the early stage of just after you've created the plan, to reach out. Because also, if you are concerned about your image or about, what they might think of you, then having that plan is one way in which you can sort of save face if that's what you're concerned with. Because you can say, listen, I'm going through this thing right now. I'm completely exhausted. I'm burnt out. But I have a plan to get back on track. This is what I'm going to be doing over the next 3 days, this next 7 days. This is how I intend to get back to delivering the best work that I possibly can, because this is important to me. I do care about this deeply and I want to succeed. And so, is there anything that I can do, or do you have any recommendations, or whatever it is that you need in that moment? Ask for it. They might not be able to give you everything you need, but they might be able to give you just enough lifelines and preservers that will keep you afloat until you get to a point in which, you can stand up on both legs and keep going. The fourth and final step is to rebuild. You've generated your plan for the next 3 to 7 days during this kind of recovery period after you've taken that rest day. And now it's time to get to work. It's time to do it. And so the first thing that I do is I set anchors throughout the day. So I've identified those points of alertness. I'm going to do the work during those periods, but I also create points of rest, like I've mentioned, that Pomodoro method of 25 minutes of work, 5 minutes rest. I personally prefer 50 minutes of work with 10 minutes rest because I feel like I get into a better flow. But again, do what works for you. Figure out at what points do your energy levels start to wane and how can you pick them back up. So set those anchors, whether that is going for a little walk, whether that is playing a song, whether that is doing a couple jumping jacks. Go for it, right? Whatever it is that is going to kind of keep your energy levels up, establish them and stick to them. Really hold on to those anchors. You might say, oh, I'll just keep going until I finish. That's what puts us in burnout in the first place. You do not go until you're done. You go and you rest as you go, because that is what's going to be sustainable. That is what's going to keep your process going. And so with that, you make time for the candy, right? You keep going, and taking those times to rest, to enjoy. Actually schedule making time for those things, just as you do the work, because right now it can be very easy to forget about those moments. It can be very easy to feel like, well, I have to get all of this done, right? That fear of stopping. But really try to keep that fear at bay by scheduling and considering those pieces of candy not just as treats, but as responsibilities to yourself. You you must take these kinds of breaks. And so the next thing that I do is, once I've set up those anchors and I've set up times in which I'm going to meet with friends, or I'm going to do some drawing, or I'm going to play some music, or I'm going to work on some fun project. The next thing is to actually check in with myself and adjust every day. At the end of the day, I always think about, okay, what exhausted me the most today? What was the most taxing? What brought me the most energy? And based on that, I adjust the amount of time that I spend on each one. So if I find that, maybe grading 10 papers was way too many for one day, the next day maybe I'll do 8 or 7. And or I might cut those 10 pieces into smaller chunks. So I might do some in the morning, one of my most alert periods, and I might do one in the mid-afternoon, my next most alert period. So maybe 6 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, so that I am working with my schedule and my kind of dips and rises and energy levels throughout the day. So this is how I break out of burnout. The first step is to recognize that this is the issue and this is what I'm experiencing, being true to myself about that, and also telling others whom I trust, so that I can, keep myself accountable and also work through it maybe with someone else. The second is to rest and give myself a bare minimum day in which I am not doing just about anything. I get rid of all of the most urgent tasks that have to get done that day. But besides that, I'm going to be on a very low mental stimulation day. I'm minimizing the amount of time I spend on screens and engaging with content. I'm not going to be reading too much. I'm going to go for a very long walk. I'm going to do laundry. I'm going to do the dishes. My house is going to be spotless. And I'll play some music, or you might color, listen to maybe some lo-fi music, or something that's not particularly, really booming and stimulating. Working out is another great opportunity. And so any kinds of repetitive physical tasks. The third thing is to reset, make a plan of action for the immediate period. So creating an audit, an inventory of things that have to get done, eliminating the things that are not particularly urgent or more like long-term, and focusing on the now. What absolutely must be done right now. And then going to asking for help from the people that you can, and recognizing and showing that you are demonstrating care and that you do want to succeed and that you care about this. And coming from that place of interest and care can really help with that feeling of embarrassment that might stem from asking for that kind of help. And the last thing is that stage of rebuilding and working towards these small incremental changes, making time for both the spinachy tasks, or the things that you have to get done, and the candy tasks that bring you pleasure and joy, and using energy anchors that are going to keep your energy levels high, and working during those periods of most alertness. But let's say you do not have the luxury of taking it slow right now, right? You might not have the opportunity to do that day of rest. And I've been in those periods too, right? I might be feeling completely exhausted and burnt out, but there's a big storm coming and it has to get done, right? So this is what I like to call my emergency rest plan. And the first step here is to reduce the scope but not the standards. I talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the episode, but the important thing to remember in these kinds of moments is, what can I get done that will satisfy the requirements of me? So for example, if it's a paper that you have to write, really look at what the evaluative criteria are if they're available, or look at what is required of you. And this isn't the same thing as saying, you know, this is going to be like awful quality, or I'm going to produce something that is half-baked. But more so, it's about reducing the scope. It is thinking about what is really going to accomplish this task enough so that you can still produce something that is worthwhile, that is going to be useful, but that you're not overextending yourself. A really great example of this in grad school, in a lot of English programs, we are required to write seminar papers in our classes. And a lot of times, and I think this is kind of going away now, but in a lot of cases, these seminar papers, they're long papers between 5 to 7,000 words typically, sometimes a little bit longer, sometimes a little shorter, but they are pitched to us as the first draft of what will someday become a publishable article. Now, to be able to write an article in one semester while you're taking a bunch of classes is incredibly difficult. I would even say impossible. Writing academic articles takes a really long time. It is a process that has a lot of steps. And so thinking about it as the first draft of a publishable article somewhere down the line can be really helpful or motivating, but it also can be incredibly, uh, you know, dismaying, because by the time you finish it, it is not the first draft of a one-day publishable article. It is like the outline or the thought that will one day become, right? We're skipping a number of steps here. So once I came to think of them less as what will one day become an article, right? Skipping all these steps of revision and further research and so on, and thought about them in terms of, this is the culmination of what I learned in this class. This is a demonstration that I have done the readings, that I have engaged in some research, and I have thought about these things to a somewhat thorough extent. That's how I approached seminar papers in the last couple of years of doing them. And so that's the first thing, reducing the scope. You're not writing an article, you're writing a paper. The second thing is to remember the basics and taking those mini breaks. So, okay, you can't take a bare minimum day. You might not even be able to just do 2 little chunks during those 3 days. You might have to do more than that. The main thing is to still do the mini breaks. Do those pomodoros. Go for the walks to the kitchen to get the small glass of water. Whatever it is, let your brain know that you have a plan in place and it has something to look forward to give it a bit of a break. So let's say you really have to crunch time one day and you're going to be working through most of the day. Taking those 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes here and there is really going to help keep it sustainable, right? You're not going to work from meal to meal. Maybe still break it into those smaller chunks, because that's what's going to get you through that day. And then finally, in a similar vein, letting your brain know that there's going to be a decompression period after this, emergency all fire event, then that's going to help you get through that day. So knowing that as you're crash landing this plane, there's going to be, that that fun little slide that will help you at the end, can be incredibly helpful. So think about the decompression period right before you start that crunch period, because it is going to give you something to look forward to and know that there's going to be a time of rest. So that's kind of the emergency rest plan that I incorporate whenever I find that I'm really close to burnout, or maybe I genuinely am pretty burnt out, but I still have to get something done that just I can't get an extension, I can't put it off any further. That's my process. The first thing is to reduce the scope. The second thing is to still make time for those mini breaks. And the third thing is to plan in advance when and how that decompression period might look. Now, let's look at all of this in a practical example. This is what I'm doing differently with this podcast. The first thing is, I've already talked a little bit about my burnout period, and now that I'm back on track, now that I'm no longer procrastinating by watching Westerns, I am also implementing a lot of the things that I did during the burnout period and the kind of recovery period into my regular schedule. So the first thing that I'm doing is I'm buffering episodes. I'm recording a couple episodes each time I sit down to record these, so that if anything ever happens, I have a store of them. So if you ever see me in a couple of episodes wearing the same shirt, you know why. And the second thing is that I'm scheduling in breaks. So for example, I'll record for 3 weeks and I give myself a week off. This not only allows me to, with the buffer episodes, I can have breaks if I absolutely need them in the moment, kind of emergency breaks, but also by scheduling in time off from recording episodes, I have more time to think about the future direction, like writing the scripts for them and things like that. And it also prevents, exhaustion or burnout from the process itself. The next thing that I'm doing is I'm dividing up the process itself. One major mistake that I made when I was creating the first few episodes is that I would do everything in one day, except for the writing. I would shoot the episode, I would edit it, I would break it into chunks for, the Instagram and TikTok short versions. I would schedule the episodes and all those chunks on the respective platforms. It was just too much. It was way too much to do in one day. And if it happened to be the case that one day that I set apart for the recording and all of that, I was sick or tired or I had something much more urgent, guess what? We're in crunch time and now we have to do the emergency rest plan. So to prevent having to use that nuclear option, I have done the buffers, I'm creating the scheduled breaks, I'm dividing up the parts of the episodes into much more manageable chunks. So I record on one day, I edit on another, and if I have time, I'll submit and schedule those episodes and the pieces that day too. But if not, I have another day in which just dedicated to that kind of task. So that division of those different pieces allows me to work on the different parts, and if anything goes wrong on any one individual day, it's not so bad as, having to do everything in the one day. And that's why I really emphasize and will continue to emphasize throughout these episodes the idea of breaking things down into smaller chunks. And the last thing, and this is more of a mindset shift than anything, and that is I've embraced the fact that done is better than perfect. Again, thinking about with that emergency plan, the idea of narrowing down the scale instead of the standards, it's really important for me to create these episodes. I enjoy making this podcast a lot, and I would much rather, going forward, continue to create these episodes, even if they're not perfect or exactly what I envision for each individual episode. I would much rather be here and doing them than not at all and disappearing for another 6 months. So all of this is to say, I burned out, but now I'm back. If you've ever gone through a burnout phase and you found a strategy that worked for you but wasn't one that I mentioned, please leave a comment below, or feel free to DM me or email me or contact me through any of the social media channels on which I post this content. I'd be really curious to hear how different folks have encountered and gone through and worked through these kinds of things. And if you enjoyed this episode, found anything useful, please share it with friends, family, anyone who might be going through a similar thing. Again, you're not alone in this process. And I will see you all next week.